My name is Darson Grantham, and Jared Huseman is with me here. And what we do on these podcasts is really we're just talking about the market. We're talking about what's going on in real estate in Des Moines and nationwide, how we're changing our businesses, how we're seeing investors change their business. Just because and we'll get into it here shortly, we're going through a shift in the market. I don't think there's any question about that. And real estate is an asset that some people see as a good opportunity and some people see as risk based on past experiences. And we're kind of going to go over why each of those could be the case. So I'll let you introduce yourself and kind of tell a little bit about what you do, Jared.
Yeah, so Jared Huseman here, president of the Catalyst team. We're part of KShape Commercial Realty, based here out of Des Moines, Iowa. We specialize in multifamily apartments across the state. As usual, if you've watched before, if you're just tuning in to watch, Darson kind of hits things with a housing perspective and investment standpoint, and then I kind of bring the commercial standpoint to it. I think Darson hit it right off the head, right off the beat. We're definitely a shifting market. Interest rates right now have been a huge changing point for buyers, especially investors right now. They're just, we're seeing 4.5, 4.75. I just had another guy quote 4.85 last night.
Yep.
We haven't seen these kind of rates now in essentially 18 months. Last time we saw these rates, people forget about it because they have a lot of short-term memories. But, we saw this happening in 2019. Actually December
18.
or so.
18, right?
Nope. No, the last time we saw rates like this, we saw it in the fall of 2019, just prior to COVID. Rates were starting to go up. If you actually remember, most people forget, we started having 4.5, 4.75 quotes the fall of 2019. And then the Federal Reserve dropped their rates in January 2020 to try to keep the market hot. And then COVID happened, and COVID just completely dropped the floor out of everything.
Gotcha.
So most people forget about it, but last time we saw rates this high, was when that happened. And even prior to that, we saw an inverted yield curve happen earlier in 19 in the summer, I believe it was, spring of 2019. Inverted yield curve led to the higher interest rates of 2019 in December. And then we had COVID hit not a few months later, and we had a recession of unproportioned, historically never seen before. And then everything just kind of changed.
Let's start off with just market updates. What are you seeing in the market, local to Des Moines? Is there anything big changes? What's happening? And I've got I'll start and let you think on that. One of the things I've noticed is I had 2 rental properties that did their rental renewal certificate this year. And I speak to a lot of investors, sell a lot of investors' properties. And so I'm talking to and about city rental inspections a lot. And one of the things that I didn't hear much of in 2020, 2021 was anyone that had big issues with the rental certs. In the city of Des Moines, it's kind of notorious for nickel and diming per se, and making obnoxious requests for investors to make sure that their houses are safe and or meet the city rental inspection. If you read the code in the city of Des Moines, it's very vague on what they ask for the city rental inspection. It really gives a lot of authority up to the rental inspectors. And so one of the things I noticed was in 2020, 2021, I didn't have very many people complaining about it. And I got my rental inspection this year, and I have about $15,000 of repairs, which a lot of it was known deferred maintenance on my properties, and so I'm fine with fixing them. I'm not mad about it. But I talked to some other investors, and they're hearing the same thing, is the city has came back to reality and is really putting the hammer down on rental properties. And whether that's right or wrong, you can decide or not decide. If you want to invest in Des Moines, you can invest in other markets that don't have any city rental inspections. There are pros and cons to it. I totally understand, but that's something that I like. Real local, hit hard. It's real. $15,000 is no chump change on a $130,000 property.
Well, I got to say, it's funny you're saying this because I know of at least 1 or 2 clients right now on the apartment market that are doing the same thing. They are getting out of the city of Des Moines, specifically the city of Des Moines. They're finding suburbs, finding small suburbs, but they are getting out of it.
And so you're saying city of Des Moines because the rental cert that we're talking about is the city proper of Des Moines, right? If you look at the address and it says, Des Moines, Iowa, your Clive, your Urbandale, your Ankeny, your West Des Moines, Norwalk, those don't, Pleasant Hill, Altoona, those don't have as strict of city rental inspections.
Well, let's tie back on 2 things here real quick here. First off, when we say rental cert, we mean rental certificate.
Yep.
For anybody who's layman terms, most cities will require landlords to have a rental certificate to legally rent that as a property.
Yep.
And the rental certificate is just showing that the property is in good working order and is safe for someone to inhabit. Now, if you go to certain counties, they do not have it. Certain small towns don't have it as well. So a rental certificate, for anybody who's not aware, every city has these usually. City of Des Moines is usually 18 months to 36 months, and you have to go through the whole process of getting your property inspected. So let's just start with that first things first. Second, let's pull back the onion a little bit here. And Des Moines is notorious for being the hardest city inspector. That's always been a common thing. It's also the most liberal city.
Yeah, which is very common. New York, San Francisco, right? Like your more democratic, liberal ran cities are going to have stronger government, more government regulations. We all know that. If you're an investor and you don't know that, now you do. No excuses.
But let's pull back here. Let's look at rental certificate too, and let's pull back why Des Moines why we're happening what's happening. So let's try to understand what's happening so we can look what's going forward. So everybody says the other cities are easy to work with. For us, Urbandale, Ankeny, Clive, West Des Moines, etc. Let's also look at the average household age of each city. You go to Urbandale, some of these suburbs, the average home built was 1960s, 1970s. You go to the Des Moines proper, Des Moines address, the average home is 1940. It's an older product home, and most of those homes are used as rentals. If you look at the rental geographic of how much are rentals in Urbandale to Des Moines, Urbandale by far is going to have a more home ownership rate. So just for that alone, we're going to look at the fact that Des Moines is going to have more code violations just from the fact that we're dealing with older product types. Let's also pull back the onion here a second here, or the curtain. You mentioned earlier that we had very easy inspections in 2020, 2021.
That's what I'm assuming because I didn't hear the bad stories, right?
Here's why you didn't hear the bad stories. They weren't doing them.
I know.
And the ones that were getting done, they were so far behind that it was just, let's get these things turned and burned, let's get them through because we need to catch up.
Yep.
So I think they were lax on those because when you have 20 inspections in front of you and you got to get them all done in one day, you got to get them done. You got to just burn them through. So we didn't have them in 2020 because of COVID. 2021, they were inundated. They were far behind. Now we're seeing the catch up here. We're seeing this 2022 of okay. And that's been a common theme we're seeing in the whole market, even with interest rates going up right now, is we're seeing a little bit of a pay the piper for the robust 2021 we had.
The good times we were rolling on for the last 3 years.
And the free money we got from 2020. That's what it was. And I would argue that what we're getting back to now with our high interest rates and as what's going on, we're just going back to where we were 18 months ago in 2019, which is really where we should have been anyway. The whole last 18 months has been a phenomenon we've never seen before with COVID, with eviction moratoriums, with no rental inspections.
Student loan payment now getting extended to the fall of 2022.
Student loans. I mean, everything we're seeing right now is a pain in the piper of what's already happened. And that's why we're seeing the inverted yield curve take place. That's why we're seeing talks of a recession. We were seeing these same talks in 2019 as well.
Yeah. It's
just that when COVID hit, the government threw the kitchen sink and the bathroom tub at COVID to solve the problem. It's also why we're seeing the inflation and supply issues as well. But I think all we're doing is we're just getting back to what should have already been happening in 2020, essentially.
Yep.
It's just that it was kicked the can down the road a little further. And again, that's I think what's happening with rental inspections right now and rental certificates is that people are actually having to pay up and come to fruition on what's going on.
Yep.
So getting into it, here's the fun part though, is that, and I've discussed with a couple owners in the last 2 or 3 days, excuse me. We keep talking about, okay, rates are going up, things are getting harder. The inverted yield curve happened last week, typically a sign of an indicator of a recession within 18 months.
Within 18 months.
But that's in the past. So, historically, we should have a recession. The question becomes, are we? Are we going to have one? And if so, when? Because if you go on the street right now and tell people that we're going to have a recession, I don't know if they're going to believe you or hear you, especially in the housing market. And I have my reasons why, but I know a lot of my investor friends who have been playing this game, myself included, for over 10 years. I've gotten tired of calling a recession for the last 6 years because we've needed one for the last 6 years, and it is not taking place. And I have my theory as to why, but even all these things transpiring and rent certificates going up higher with $15,000 of repairs. Here's the funny part: your house is probably worth $15,000 more next year because of inflation.
Yep.
Not even including depreciation in there. If we just do just inflation, it's worth that. So imagine putting $15,000 in and then getting a $30,000 bump because now you have the CapEx done and you have inflation and appreciation, and now you're worth $160 instead of $130. So we can complain about all the bad times and we can keep calling for a recession, but we forget to look at the other side of things that things are still going pretty well. And again, the question becomes is, we're paying the piper now, but will the piper really come due in a more firm way? in a harder sledgehammer style way, or is this just going to
Dove
be
or hawk, right? Like is it a dove or is it a hawk?
Exactly.
I mean, so the inverted yield curve. This happened in 2019, right?
Mm-hmm.
And within 18 months, there's supposed to be a recession. Does COVID consider that as the recession? Like that downplay? Is that the recession that happened? Because technically we were not in a recession.
So So my joke is always this: COVID was the recession we all wanted. It wasn't the one we needed. Okay. It cooled things off in a way that it was too fast. It was throwing a massive. It was dumping a helicopter full of water onto a campfire. It just cooled everything out so fast
for 2 months.
For 2 months, and the government got scared and said we can get this fire started again. So they threw a nuclear bomb at it. So COVID was the recession we all wanted and not what we needed. What we needed was a cooling off, and it just happened too quick. But it was a recession. Technically, you can make a case that the inverse yield curve happened, and it created that, but COVID was kind of an outlier. Now, for layman's terms, I want to take a moment and step back. The inverted yield curve, what is it and why is it important? The inverted yield curve, when you track it, has historically predicted a recession within 18 months. What the inverted yield curve means is that in the short term, interest rates become higher than long-term interest rates. So, a case in point example, if you're going to borrow money and you have to pay it back in 5 years, let's say it should be 5% interest rate. And if you're going to pay it back in 10 years, it should be 6%. Because typically speaking, the longer you're going to hold the money, the more you're going to want a return for holding the money for a longer period of time. What happens when the inverted yield curve takes place is that short-term borrowing costs now exceed long-term borrowing cost. So in that same case, 5 years, 5% interest rate, 10 years, 6% interest rate, what's happening is right now is that in 5 years, interest rate's 6%, 10 years, the interest rate's 5%. So it's inverted, and that means that people are going to start fleeing basically investments.
And the reason is, the way I understand it is, if you're going to put your money away, you're going to put $100,000 away, 100 million, whatever that number is, and you do it for 5 years at 5%. And the other option is to put it away for 10 years at 4%. What would you do? Right? Like you would always do the 5 years so that you then have the option and opportunity at that 5 year mark to redo it. Mm-hmm. Right? So you're locking money up for a lower interest rate than for long term than you are short term. That's why it's inverted. Right? And it's not a healthy market. That is why it's an indicator.
Well, and here's what it should be, because basic principle should be, it's kind of the theory is like real estate, look at real estate over the last 150 years, it's gone up. It's talking about 100 years, it's gone up. In theory, we can predict the future further out easier than we can the short term. So in theory, you should always get more money and better investment over the long term.
Yes.
And that's changed. It's inverted. You can now get that better return in a short time period, which means people have more confidence in tomorrow than they do in next month. And that's what's changing. That's what's the problem, is that people should, in theory, always have more confidence in 20 years that we're going to do better than we do in 1 year.
And who changes the yield curve? Is it like someone says the yield curve is this, or it's the markets?
The markets. The markets dictate. I mean, the Federal Reserve will adjust its prime rate, and prime affects all of us, interest rate what you're borrowing at. And then from there, the markets will dictate whether they want to buy a 10-year treasury from the government or a 5-year treasury. And when the government says, you know what, I see more faith, or a buyer sees more faith in the 5-year treasury and the 10-year treasury, that's what's causing the inversion.
Could it be poor faith in the government?
There could be a case to that.
Right? Like that's a possibility.
Either way, the point is that this typically creates a recessionary environment. Now, from my perspective, I want to take a moment here and play actually the positive side to all this. Will this affect real estate? We mentioned what's happening in the local market right now. We're seeing interest rates go up. I'm seeing buyers want greater demand for cap rates for yield in our market. However, real estate's still lagging, so we don't yet know how this is going to affect our market because we're still 30 days out. This is happening.
Even determining a recession is 6 months away, right? Because isn't it 2 down quarters?
Well,
technically,
here's the best part of a recession is that no one can predict a recession until you're already through it.
Right.
You can't because of our information, our data. You can only call what you're seeing now. We can only predict what's happening. So we have not yet seen what interest rates are doing to our market on a local or national level because not enough deals are getting closed. We're going to see the effects of this in 30 to 60 days.
When you say deals in real estate, I'm talking just in general a recession.
I would agree too. Both. I would agree both these things. So we're not going to see the effects of any of these things now. But this is why we're trying to look ahead, look to the future. Again, back to the inverted yield curve, back to what we're seeing in long-term interest rates.
And the 6 months. So 6 months to determine if there's a recession. And then another lag in the real estate market to determine if the real estate market was affected by the recession, right? Because right now I've seen people say the numbers are the best they've ever been in real estate, and I've seen people say there's a flattening and numbers are going to start to go down. And like, I mean, here's the deal: data can be moved in any way you want. I can show you in the market where it's the best market ever, and I can show you where it's the worst market ever. Just give me a different set of data. Give me a different story to tell. I can do it.
Right. Well, it's so funny you say that because it's so true. And you know, you can manipulate data for whatever you want. And to your point as well, this is so interesting, I find, is let's say it takes 6 months to figure out a recession, 3 months real estate to feel it. That's also on the coast. Realize that we're in the Midwest here in Iowa. It's going to take even longer for us to feel the effects of that because we typically are a slower market. So the question,
like a lot slower. Like people forget the '08 thing didn't happen like that. Mm-hmm. We all talk about like it did. It was not an overnight situation.
Well, I think that's almost very listening too as well, that anybody watching this, I hope most of you are actually in the market, but for anybody that's younger, there are some of you who are in this market now today who have never seen 08, 09 and do not remember it. I remember I was getting in the market at that time. Just
go watch The Big Short.
Yeah, Big Short.
Like, it's really not that inaccurate.
And the one I love is The Margin Call. Like one of the Margin Calls explains it well. But either way, Too Big to Fail is another great movie that explains it. But you forget all these different things. But
after you watch those movies, you're going to go buy gold.
But back to, well, I can argue why buying gold is terrible. Like,
I'm just telling you, like, you're going to feel like you should just go buy gold.
Well,
don't necessarily use that as financial advice.
Well, it's funny, we were in a meeting, both of us last week, talking about this actually with Mark Kane, our CEO of KW Commercial, or KW in general, sorry, KWRI. Both of us were in this meeting. And afterwards, I was talking to another agent about this, exactly what's going to happen. And Mark made his predictions on the market. And we said, to this point, this is my theory on our market here in Des Moines. In 08, it took us 3 years to see our downturn. It took us 2011. If you look at our market,
get to the bottom.
It took us 3 years, yep. Now, what COVID has done is it's drastically accelerated everything. Technology in every which way capacity. In our market for apartments, I've talked about this before, I've touched on it. We're seeing institutions invest in Des Moines which we never have before. And I mean institutions from Manhattan and Long Beach, California, and Miami. We've seen individual investors come to our market. We've never seen institutions come to our market. So this means, again, why are they coming here? They're going straight to the source. It's going faster. They're cutting out tertiary markets, cutting out secondary markets. Everything's going to affect our market faster this time than it did last time. So I can guarantee you this. If we do see a recession on the coast, it will not take us 3 years to see it. My personal belief, I said this to another agent, is everything's happening 10 times faster than it did 10 years ago, especially with COVID now. Last time it took us 3 years to see that, so that's 36 months. Accelerate that times 10. I think the Des Moines, Iowa market, if we have a recession on the coast, we have 3 to 6 months to prepare in Des Moines.
3 months would be too short, in my opinion.
3 months?
6 months I could see happening.
I think
3 months is quick in real estate.
So quick. I agree. But if we see the recession happening, I think we have 3 to 6 months to prepare our market for that hit to happen. Now, here's the other side to that coin. I love what you just said about being able to manipulate data either way. This all comes back to, again, the data shows a recession. With that being said, are we going to have one?
And like, what's a recession in real estate? And like, because the word recession can mean something different in the economy or like real estate, right? Like, you mean like house prices going down?
So this ties back perfectly what I was going to lead to. I love the theory, and it was brought up a lot with COVID, the K-shape recession, which some guys did great, some guys did bad, and the industry just was well.
That's what it ended up being,
yeah,
right? I mean,
100%.
there wasn't any argument that that's what it looked like.
And let's look back to 2001. 2001 was the dot-com boom. Real estate thrived. Stock market tanked, but real estate thrived. So going back to our industries here, let's go back to my conversation with owners here locally is, okay, a recession's maybe forthcoming, interest rates are higher, et cetera, et cetera. Does it matter? Because at the end of the day, right now, people have two things. They have jobs and wages are going up. And at the end of the day, people have jobs and wages are going up. They feel confident they can spend in the economy. We are a consumer-based economy. It's what it is. And 3, not only are they going to spend money, they're going to spend money on their houses. They can pay higher rents. They can pay their rent in general. So for our markets, apartments and houses, single family, I don't know if we're even affected. Now, could it affect office and retail? Drastically. New development? Maybe. But I don't know if it even matters. The other side of that coin is the millennial generation. Largest population of people demographic-wise since the baby boomers back in the 60s and 70s. And they are all hitting prime earning years, prime buying years. They're all in their 30s. They're all having families. They're having kids. They're spending, consumer economy. So even though we're seeing these things with the Federal Reserve and interest rates, I don't know if it matters.
Especially in our market. right? Like the price point that we're at. So your average is 250 on it. And we're talking, if you're talking millennials, we're going to go down that path of like, is the real estate market going to go down? Because of the influx of that set of buyers, the influx of institutions that are buying the larger apartment complexes that are not currently buying single families in Des Moines,
Right.
that I know of. And there are a lot of, like, Little Rock, Arkansas is one. I know that there's 3 or 4 institutions buying there. I think Des Moines is bigger than Little Rock, or at least like it's not that much smaller if it is. So like that those 2 buying pools in the residential market, when your average price point is 280, even if interest rate goes up and your price point, like that 280 person can only afford 240 now, right? Or your $1,300 payment is now $1,500. That's not affecting those buyers. If $200 a month is changing your finances incredibly, you should not be buying a house at that price point. I'm the dumb realtor that says that.
I think you give too much credit sometimes to buyers. Buyers are always, I mean, it's typical, it's a car salesman, you know, what payment can you afford? And they're going to say whatever they can afford.
I hate that. Okay, fine, but I hate it. Don't do that.
I agree. I hate it, and it's not how it should be done. But I'm not, just because you and I are ethical agents, we try to give our clients the best advice financially possible to make them make money and help them out. Does not mean every other agent in the world does that. I mean, I know plenty of people to talk about. Now, here's the part that I think makes me happy as an agent, an owner, an investor as well, is, and I no longer own multifamily, I just help broker, I own other asset classes, so I don't compete with my clients. So full disclosure there. But what happens is this: a homeowner goes out and says, I want to buy a house for $280,000. We run their credit, okay, and their interest or whatever it is, you can only afford $250,000. Right now, I cannot find product to sell, I'm assuming, at that $250,000 price point for housing.
And you can.
Okay, well, let's say
here's the deal. People like you can't get new build. You can't get a super nice in the suburbs. I mean, you can find a dang good property for $200,000 in Des Moines.
So this is where I make a case, though. This is where I think that maybe A class might be well positioned. This is my personal theory, but the point I was going to make on this is that the tenant then will still say, I'm going to choose to rent. If you're watching this, I'm just going to be honest here and tell you my thoughts, and I don't care. But to your point, millennials specifically, in my experience working with a lot of millennials, even especially younger people, they have 2 things. One, they are going to look at the payment and say, I can afford that, even though they shouldn't.
Okay.
I don't know if they have the financial wherewithal, capability. They want to not talk financial literacy, so they're going to pay whatever their banker tells them they can afford because that's what they are told they can afford. They don't know enough to ask enough questions. That's 1. 2, and this is something I can go back to as well, young people today don't like to struggle. They grew up in A-class student housing that their parents paid for, or they grew up in a nice suburb in the houses, whatever it was. They don't like to struggle. So even my experience over the years of telling friends, go live in a starter home, go house hack a duplex, go do some of these things that are going to make you financially set in your 30s and 40s. I would say, out of the advice I've given to that to people, maybe, and this is being generous here, 1 out of 20 listens. That's being generous, I think. So to your point, I think you can find a house for $280,000 to live in Des Moines and be happy. But I think people are going to say, you know what? That's Des Moines. I don't feel safe there. Too much crime. I don't want to live in that downtrodden property. I'd rather keep paying rent at an A-plus location apartment complex where I like where I'm at, all the amenities, the bells and whistles, and throw away the money rather than invest it in an asset that's going to go up in value potentially or pay down debt and become homeowners. My personal theory, feel free to argue.
All I can say is if you come to me with that, I'm going to highly encourage you to rethink that. And not because I want you to buy a property with me, because it is not good financial advice.
I'm not saying it is.
I understand that. So the other side of that is I think you're painting a very broad stroke of millennials and Gen Z, of like they all think this way. I think I've heard numbers of 15% are doing really well, and then the other 85% are really struggling. And I surround myself with people that are growing businesses that are doing big things. So I struggle to see, to be honest, that 85% that are living in mom's basement or that can't get out or whatever. So I think that there is opportunity for you, that if you're in that, the other 15% that want to live in a higher class, I think that they're going to get their butts bit shortly. Unless you're doing the things that the top 5% that are house hacking, that are building wealth around, aside from just collecting a W-2 job. That's my opinion. So it could, like, you're probably right in the grand scheme of things that's what people think. There's a reason why apartments are getting built in the suburbs, right? Like, yes, like you can get more rent there for the same quality of product. Like it makes a lot of sense. I get it.
And to your point, you're right. I'm painting a very broad stroke, and in some ways it's pessimistic here, but it's just what I see. And again, this is me having walked a lot of these A-class apartment units in the suburbs over the years and seen this. And I see the people who are paying rent and they should not be paying rent. Maybe they can't afford whatever it is. But I've seen them where they are in these A-class units and they really should be more in a B-class unit to save their money. Yep. But they don't want to because that's just not what they did. I'm not trying to be pessimistic here. I'm just saying what I've seen. And this is, I think, not always true of our market as well. This is more true of the generalized market.
So this is interesting. Just when a recession hits and people don't have the money to spend on A-class, then they go to the B-class.
Right.
B-class goes C-class, C-class goes D-class, right? Like, that's the thing.
It's funny. It's funny. This is all ties back into things, but people, as in general, we don't solve problems until they're staring us right in the face. Yep. So until we have a recession, no one's going to actually solve this issue. The question is, will we actually have one? Because again, as I pointed to earlier, we have a great labor market right now. People are employed. Maybe some people are employed that should not be employed, quite honestly, here. We can make that the case as well. And tying this all back around, Iowa's different. I mean, we work hard. We work harder here. We have a strong work ethic. We pay our bills. I mean, I'm not seeing any real properties go to
foreclosures. I'm not talking about foreclosures. Like, they're not happening. It's not going to happen. Not for the next at least 2 years. I think that's being generous. It's probably going to be longer than that. The numbers are not up. The percentages are, yes, whatever. Like, it's not going to happen, especially in Des Moines. Now, I don't know the Florida markets, the California markets, the ones that really have the volatility. I don't study them. I don't pay attention. But Des Moines, no properties they're not getting foreclosed on. And if they are, they're sold to investors before they ever hit the market. If you want to go to those, they're every Tuesday at 10 o'clock at the Polk County Assessor site, or Polk County Sheriff's. Like, you can go up, you show up, have cash, have a bucket of cash, and you can buy them. There's 20 to 30 people that show up every Tuesday, and maybe it's every other. Like, you can do that. It's possible, and there's going to be 5 to 10 that they auction off, but most of the banks just buy them and then resell them, and they're not actually foreclosures.
So tying this all back around, what we talked about here, we talked about inverted yield curve, we've talked about Des Moines market, we talked about demographics of people, the population of multifamily, millennials, apartment owners, whatever it may be. Tying this all back around, here's what I can say is that last week we had the inverted yield curve. It's been the big headlines for most investors. Is the recession forthcoming or not? None of us really know. If they do know, they're lying to you and trying to sell you something. All I can say from my perspective is I believe even if we have a recession, I believe that real estate, multifamily apartments will continue to hold value, maybe not appreciate, but they will maintain value, potentially go down a little bit and decrease because of higher yields with higher interest rates and higher cap rates, potentially. However, I think rental rates will
That's what I think. They'll
change.
Offset it.
Will offset. I agree. I tend to agree. But overall, I believe that we still have a pretty stable market for Des Moines, despite what happened with the yield curve. We might see a slight drop off, but if I had to call it, and I had a global property, I would say 5 to 10% top of a reduction in price and values of apartments. Maybe not housing, but apartments. Or at least houses being on the market for more than 15 minutes. Yeah. That's one thing we might start seeing. But overall, I think we're going to be in a great market. I see us going forward very, very well. And here's the thing, guys. For anybody out there watching, and gals, if you are watching this, who really cares? Because if you're looking at this from a 1 year standpoint, it might be important. But if you're buying on the right principles and criteria for 3, 5, 7, and 10 years plus, and you have the right strategies involved with your buying, purchasing, which is what we tend to help our buyers with, make good financial decisions, not just sell them whenever they can be sold, yes, as we alluded to. If you do it right, you're going to be fine anyway. Even if we have a recession, you and I have talked about this so many times, we joke about it. If you had bought a house or an apartment building in 2007, December, at the very top of the market, you'd have been an idiot in 2008 and 9. If you still own that property, you are a freaking genius 15 years later. And you probably had your debt totally paid out. In fact, I'll say this real quick here. I was watching an interview of Grant Cardone the other day. Someone was interviewing him. Grant, not Grant doing the interview. This was actually a flip. Grant said he sold his home in 2008 for $14 million, put that $14 million into an apartment investment in 2008. It's now worth $300 million 15 years later. So 30% of his net worth of being a billionaire is in one asset that he bought at the recession. So again, who really cares what happens? Do you think he cares if that property was down 20% in value? No, because he bought it right with the right intentions to own for a long term. So at the end of the day, everything we're talking about may not even matter.
It shouldn't matter.
Shouldn't matter.
If you're a sound investor, it literally shouldn't matter.
And this is, I think, the whole point of us doing our podcast here and us talking is that we're just trying to tell you what we see in the market, what's happening. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to be advisors, guides, and say, this is what we're seeing, and also don't fall into the traps.
Yeah, just a lot of, like, we are not the smartest people in the world or in the room, and there's no one else in here. But, like, you just have to pay attention to your base, like your criteria, your investment decisions, and use advisors, like use Jared, use myself, use another, 2 or 3 people and run every single big purchase, big decision by them.
And here's the funny part I'll say, and as we kind of wrap this up here, I'll just say this, is that I think Tim Ferriss said it first years ago, so funny is, and I know you follow this as well, is don't read the news. I mean, I really hope if you're watching this right now and you hear the inverted yield curve happen last week, it's the first you're hearing about it. That means because you're watching local guys talk about the local market and you're not reading the big headlines.
All
of the
the big
news.
YouTube people are talking about it though.
Are they? Okay,
Yes.
I don't watch it. I read the paper actually. I
they
still
are.
do.
And it's good that it's good to know that it's happening. But you have to figure out what story is being painted behind it.
Right.
So,
and this is where we're just here to help give you guys an asset. And again, we're just trying to tell you that, again, watch these things, but at the end of the day, if you're doing things right, you should be able to sit back, have a cup of coffee, and say, who the F cares?
okay. Yep, we'll wrap it up then. If you want to reach out to either of us, our information is below in this video, or you can email us. My email is dgrantham@kw. Just go find us on Google, and then Jared, you can share your information.
Yeah, for us, you can find us pretty easily. You can either Google my name, Jared Huseman. I pop up in like the first 3 pages. Pretty easy to find on all the social media, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. CatalystTeam.com. That's KATALYST.team.com. You can search Catalyst as well. Happy to be a resource and help. As always, we're just talking real estate, and we'll be back next week with more.
Yep, sounds good.